Welcome, everybody, to the last Game Informer show of the year. Not to freak you out, but this is be the last show, but we'll be back next week with another great episode. That's right, this is the Game Informer show, the show where we inform you guys about games. I'm your host, Ben Reeves. Perfect start. We have Joe Juba here with us today.
Hello.
How's it going?
Great.
Jeff Cork is also here.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. And Marcus Stewart.
Hey, I'm here too.
And last but not least, we have a brand new face. Who is this? Aubrey Edwards from AEW Wrestling. How's it going?
It's going great. It's a wonderful and exciting New Year's Eve.
Yeah, it is. It sounds like you do a lot of things over at AEW. You're currently a project coordinator. Do you want to explain a little bit about what that is and what you do?
Yeah, so I essentially have like two jobs at AEW. One of them is I'm a referee. And you can see me on AEW Dynamite on TNT, 8 o'clock, 7 Central every Wednesday. The other thing that I do is a variety of different tasks. I host a podcast called AEW Unrestricted, new episodes every Thursday, wherever you get your podcast, free to subscribe. I co-host with Tony Schiavone, who's the voice of a lot of wrestling fans' childhoods. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm producing for AEW Games, which is our new gaming initiative where we're developing games, we're streaming games, we're doing a lot of fun stuff. So I'm currently working every day on Elite General Manager, which is one of our mobile titles in development.
Oh, yeah. And you have some history in the game industry.
I do. Before I became a full-time referee, I was developing games for about 10 years.
That's cool. Well, what's that transition like? Were you always like into wrestling and you're like, I want to fights or... you had a lot of brothers and you're really good at like putting people in the corner?
No, it's weird because I never watched wrestling as a kid and I had no interest in it. And I didn't really know that it was a thing until about 2011. I had a lot of friends who watched wrestling as kids, and WrestleMania 27, I think The Rock and Stone Cold came back. So all my friends were like, guys, we gotta watch WrestleMania. And I'm like, okay, cool, great. Who's the Undertaker? I don't know what's going on. Like I knew like nothing at all about wrestling.
And you're like, maybe I'll just get really into this.
Right. Well, that's essentially what happened. Is I was like watching it, I'm like, this is great. Because in addition to video games, I was a classically trained ballet dancer for about 21 years. So I'd always been a theater kid. And it didn't dawn on me until I watched wrestling that wrestling is just another kind of theater. Only this one was very interesting because the fans and the performers have this sort of relationship where they're reacting to each other in real time. Whereas like ballet, you train for a bunch of months, you do like a 2-minute piece and then everyone claps for you. Whereas this is like you get real-time feedback in the moment and can react and change to that. So from my perspective as a performer, it was this completely new thing that I immediately appreciated because you have this athleticism tied into it as well. And I just got hooked. I started traveling to indie shows. I went to a couple of WrestleManias, but I was like, I'm just a fan. I had no interest in actually performing whatsoever until I retired from dance. And then one of the guys in our local indie promotion was like, have you ever thought about reffing? And I said, nope. So he asked me to try it. And I sucked initially, like real bad. But then I stuck to it. And 3.5 years later, I'm on television yelling at dudes every week.
What separates a good ref from a ref that sucks?
Oh, that's a very, very long question. I don't know if we have enough time on this.
Oh, boy. I didn't know it was that huge. What are two bullet points?
This is a special 5-hour episode of the show.
Oh God, telling my entire life story, guys. No, so I think part of it is like understanding what the role of a referee is in wrestling. Like I'm gonna we call it like kayfabe, like what happens in front of you in the screen is like, okay, this is story stuff, but then behind the scenes, like we're all one team, right? Like spoilers. I go into a match knowing how it ends. I'm actually like an actress pretending to be a referee. Sorry. Didn't mean to burst your bubble there.
You're faking it?
The punches and the bumps are real, but the rule yelling is fake. No, so essentially what it is like I'm there to help the guys tell a story. And that's part of the reason that I got sucked into it so much was that in games and game development, I was a producer. So I never actually made anything. I just helped other people make an awesome game and enabled them to tell their stories. And literally, I do the same thing as a referee. The wrestlers go out, they have what they're trying to do and their points they're trying to hit. And I'm there to help the bad guys get, boos. I'm there to like help the good guy get sympathy. I'm there to make sure that they're staying safe. There's all of these various different things. And I'm essentially a project manager for the match.
Yeah, it sounds like it reminds me of. Did you ever watch the show Glow, the Netflix show?
So Glow, the first season is actually like the finale is like the best encapsulation of why wrestling is awesome.
Yeah.
And anytime someone's like, I don't understand why wrestling could be cool, I'm like, watch the first season of Glow. It'll all make sense.
Yeah, it's just like one of the characters on that show. For people who haven't watched it, is a soap star, and she ends up on this wrestling show, and like there's a moment where it clicks for her, and she's like, "Oh, I know exactly what wrestling is. This is like a soap opera." Like, it's a fun moment.
It's
Anyway,
overly dramatic where people punch people. It's great.
Yeah,
Rest
exactly.
in peace, Glow, by the way.
Yeah, it got canceled too.
That's so sad.
That's a huge bummer. Aubrey, thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate you being here.
Yes.
Perfect time to come because we're going to talk about games of 2020. It's like the last day of the year, at least for us, and maybe when you're listening to it. And we want to reflect on the year that was. We've been doing that the last couple of weeks, and now we're talking about the big guys, all the big games that we played this year, some of our favorites. We're going to reflect on them. So let's get it off. Let's get going on it. Let's get it off. Yeah, we'll retake that at some point.
What kind of
we don't have
podcast is
time.
this again?
Perfect podcast to be on.
Yay.
So we'll just go around the horn. We'll do one game to talk about each. And Jeff Cork, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll start off. I'll do a heel turn right out of the gate. I'm gonna say one of my favorite games is Fortnite. Boo!
2020.
Why, Jeff? Why?
That's a game for kids and
popular, but
babies.
it's like I play it with my son, and I have the best time. And I love the way that the map evolves over time. I think it's great to have like a sense of place that I'm very familiar with this thing, and then like when a new season rolls around or like something happens that's just incrementally different, like, oh, there's a floating island over this one place. That's crazy. Oh, this place that we used to love to loot there was a fast food place is now completely obliterated, or now you can drive cars. Like, just stuff is always happening in the game, and it's super fantastic. I think that monetization, predatory. Don't like a lot of stuff about that, but it's just a super fun game that it makes me feel like I'm always right on the edge of like, I could be a lot better if I practiced more. So I like that. There's like a skill ceiling that feels like it's within reach, but you can still kind of chump around and have a good time. So
yeah,
I think Fortnite was one of the best times I've had this year.
How easy is it to get some of those Marvel skins?
How much money do you have? And a lot of them actually were part of the Battle Pass last season, so
it's
they're kind of yeah. So sorry, you're not going to get Wolverine in his classic suit, but a lot of them you can. If you like that Master Chief skin, you get $20. It could be yours. That's just you could spend as much money on that game as you'd like.
Yeah,
that's generous.
Yeah, you can. It's very generous. How much money do you like?
Have you tried, Cork?
Have I tried?
Tried spending a lot of money on that game?
I have. I've accidentally spent.
It's possible.
I don't even want to think about how much money I've spent on that stupid game.
You accidentally spent money on this game?
That's what I like to tell myself. It's not like
okay.
I just
you're just justifying it. All right,
I'm absolutely justifying. Yeah, it's very much like a. Oh wow, Kratos! I like Kratos. I really like God of War, and there's a Kratos skin. I could get it. No, I am getting it apparently, and I just feel like I'm possessed by some kind of capitalist ghost.
It's kind of like how I accidentally keep eating cookies.
It's exactly that same sensation. I would imagine if you did a brain scan, it's the same thing.
Yeah, perfect. Well, yeah, Fortnite. I mean, it was still big this year. I'm glad you're still having fun with it.
Yeah, a lot of crazy stuff happened this year in it. So,
Marcus, what about you?
I'm gonna go with Streets of Rage 4. I was a huge Sega kid growing up, and Streets of Rage 2 in particular was a really big game for me and my younger brother. Like, played that nonstop. And I wasn't too big on Streets of Rage 3, and then the series died for like a gazillion years until it came back this year. And to me, it is the best entry in that entire series, finally knocking Streets of Rage 2 off of its perch, because it takes pretty much everything that I love about the second game and just puts a really cool comic book, graphic novel look over it, and kind of tightens up the controls a bit, adds some combos, throw in a few cool characters. Shout out to Cherry, who was the best character in that whole game. And it's just a fun, nostalgic, good time. Like, it's, beat 'em ups have kind of died again after coming back last generation. So it was nice to get one this year that, it doesn't really reinvent the wheel at all, but it just kind of reminds, at least me, why I fell in love with that franchise in the first place and that genre. It's also low-key got one of the best soundtracks of the year that I wish more people talked about. Like, they got like the original composers for Streets of Rage back on that, and it's so It is so good. It's good punching people in the face and eating food off the ground music. And I'm always looking for that specific type of genre in my soundtracks.
So you
But
can type into Spotify, punch people in the face, and eat food off the ground.
yeah, I'm screaming at my Alexa across the
different
house. Like,
genres,
Alexa, I
yeah.
need food eating off the ground music. What you got?
Yep.
Now playing Streets of Rage 4.
Yeah, my dog listens to that all the time. Jeff Quirk, or sorry, going backwards. Wow, this is a mess. What's happening?
Hey.
Good thing this is the last episode of the year. Joe, you want to jump in and save me?
Yeah, I'll do my best. There were lots of big games that I played this year that I enjoyed, but I think the most recent one that I want to talk about a little bit is actually one of the biggest controversies right now. Because I've been playing a lot of Cyberpunk 2077. And I'm playing it on PS5 right now. And it's one of those things where everyone is talking about how buggy this game is, how the performance is spotty, how the developer CD Projekt Red was maybe a little bit deceptive in how it positioned the game to people. Like, there's a lot of controversy about that. And I think one of the things that is a little bit of a bummer to me right now is all of that controversy is sort of drowning out other discussions about the game that I think just from a purely like systems and mechanics and gameplay perspective, there's a lot to dig into with Cyberpunk that is interesting. And I don't think it's a perfect game by any stretch. It's like it's got ups and downs, but I am I have really been enjoying the kind of like cyberpunk atmosphere that it's been creating. It just feels a lot like those. It does a good job of capturing what I like in movies like Blade Runner or Akira, or like it's got that grimy neon vibe just down. It really has that well, and it does a good job, I think, of sort of capturing what people would want out of that, like the core elements of a cyberpunk fantasy, right? Like you can hack into computers, you can put weird mechanical blades on your arms, and you're scanning everything in the environment and all of that stuff. Like I think if you can set aside the issues, there's an element there of that this game can give you that no other game can, like that. So I've really been appreciating that sort of that element of it, while at the same time also sort of grinding my teeth when it crashes on me 3 times in 20 minutes or something.
Oh yeah, you're like, I must like this game if I keep playing it and it's crashed on me like consistently once every hour. I'm like, gosh, dang it.
Yeah, I mean, there really is an element of it to that, right? Because it's not just sunk time. Like I would have no problem putting this game down if I wasn't enjoying it. But there is some part of me, for all of the problematic elements of this game, that it's still drawing me back.
Yeah, I got a leg augment where you can hold down the button and then you jump really high. I really recommend that one. It's been a lot of fun using that.
That one's
you can jump over fences and stuff like that, and it's good for sneaking around.
I used that until I got the double jump leg augment.
Ooh,
which is even better.
Can you get higher with that?
I don't know if it's necessarily higher, but it gives you more control, so it's easier to get to different places in the world.
Sure. Okay. Well,
does it let you experience a double jump from the first person perspective then? So you can look down and see what is happening mechanically with the double jump?
I've tried. I haven't quite gotten a good look at it, but I've wondered that same thing.
Little thrusters.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, if it's a cyberpunk world, you've got little like ankle boosters that just.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm mad none of you made a Creed joke in that whole thing.
But. Creed?
Can you take me high? Okay.
I'm not familiar with this band.
No.
I think
they're the most popular band in the world in 2000.
they really were. All right, Aubrey, save us.
We'll let it
what was one of your favorite games this year?
Let me come in here and just shut up Marcus so he's not singing Creed anymore. So probably the game that I played the most this year was Animal Crossing. And I think in a nutshell, it is the most 2020 game to come out in 2020 because it came out right at the start of the pandemic. And I remember like being stuck at home and saying, oh, I don't want to take the trash out. I don't want to water my plants. I don't want to get the mail. But then every morning I'm like, I need to open up Animal Crossing and get the mail and water my plants and do all this other stuff. So it like made all of the things that are boring about real life really fun when life was very, very stressful. So I think from a timing perspective, it was great. On top of that, the whole like teaching kids about the economy. Like I remember logging into websites and sitting in queues so that I could trade turnips and making sure that I had 10 tickets to an island and just like, you have to have the right dodo code. And there's like all of this stuff. But I'm like, Animal Crossing is legit making the next generation of stock investors. And like just the whole idea of it being a game that I sunk enough time in, because I never really got into Animal Crossing. It didn't really make a lot of sense to me, but I think it's just the timing of it really is what the thing that drew me into it. It's like, yeah, real life is kind of crappy right now, but this has everything real life does, except it's got cuter graphics.
It also has one of the best moments of the year, I think, is when it switches from like 4:59 to 5 o'clock, and the 5 o'clock music starts, and it's just like that super funky jam. It's like the best thing. It's just like, all right, now we're off the clock. No one's gonna give us side eye when we're just fishing.
I love that game too, and that was also is that most of our first Animal Crossing, or anyone had played the series a lot? Like Jeff,
Oh yeah,
you were
I played
really
it from
into
the beginning.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, because it was the same.
I played
thing
the
for me.
very, very first one, and like back when it was on the GameCube, and if you reset the time clock, you had the dude pop out of the ground telling you that you were cheating. So then you keep doing it to see if he keeps saying something new. Like that was my whole entire experience with Animal Crossing up until this year. I was just trying to figure out how to cheat the time.
Pissing off Mr. Rossetti.
Yes, it was amazing.
Yeah, this was my first Animal Crossing, but I think one of the interesting things about it is because we got our code for it a little early, so we could do the review in advance. Like Jeff and I were still playing it in normal circumstances before the pandemic really kicked in. And I think part of what's interesting about that to me anyway is like, I don't know that I would have gotten into Animal Crossing, like this version of it, without that kind of face-to-face local element to it. Like, I don't know if I would have quite gotten the appeal if Jeff and I hadn't spent, so many days in the office, like doing the local connection, exchanging this and that, like exchanging just like tips around the water cooler and stuff. So I think I feel really fortunate that I was able to play it under the circumstances that I was, because otherwise I don't think it would have gotten its hooks in me in the same way.
Yeah, Brian Shea, I think, recently tweeted out a picture of you guys like sitting next to each other, chatting and playing Animal Crossing without masks, and it was like weird and like, oh wait, yeah, that was like right before.
Yeah, that was
the
in
last
like
possible moment you could do that.
It was like late February we were doing that, I think. Yeah,
it was right before. I remember when I went to Nintendo for a preview, like in their offices, at their front desk, it was like, if you have been to China, don't be here, essentially. I'm paraphrasing. But it was like before like everyone really knew it was up. It was just kind of like
yeah.
Well, games are fun. At least I'll talk about another fun game. It's also pretty wholesome. I consider it a wholesome game, but nowhere near as wholesome as Animal Crossing. Ori and the Will of the Wisps was hands down one of my favorite games of the year. It's just like such a really good example of taking the Metroid formula and running with it. Really solid. It also takes some lessons from the Hollow Knight series, and just like running after your souls collection and stuff like that, and the combat feels really good. And man, I really love that game. Really, really solid platforming. Some people complain that it got really hard near the end, and it is a good challenge, but I think it's like a solid, fun challenge where you're not like beating your head against a wall, where it's like you feel the challenge, but then when you overcome it, you just feel really good about having done that. So if you haven't played it, you should. Jeff Cork, you want to talk about your second game?
Yeah, I would say that this is one of my favorite games of the year, and also absolutely one of the biggest surprises is Immortals: Fenyx Rising. I remember, when it was called Gods and Monsters, I was somewhat ambivalent about it. Then they changed the name, and I was immediately like, "That what a terrible decision! You're spelling Phoenix what way? And there's not a colon in there. What is going on?" And then
I still think Gods and Monsters was a better name, though, right?
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I know that I saw some footage that Kim, when she had a preview event, I saw the footage and I was just kind of like, oh no, this is not good. I don't know. I'm not into this. I just thought the aesthetic was really corny, and I thought that it seemed so heavily inspired by Breath of the Wild that I just felt really derivative and just kind of by the numbers in a lot of ways. And then I started playing it and I was like, oh, these jokes are not landing. I don't like this humor. And then like probably about an hour or so, I was like, okay, this is absolutely my kind of thing. I'm into it 100%. I think one of the problems too is I tried to make a character that looked like me, which is instantly a regrettable decision. And I was like, I heard you could go to a barber chair eventually and change it. And I the second that I found that, it was just like
tripped over yourself running towards the barber chair.
Yeah, I felt like Yosemite Sam dropping his little hindquarters in a pail of water, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna be a girl with a ponytail. We'll solve this problem immediately. Guy with the beard is awful, but it's so much fun, and it does seem like, yeah, there's a lot of things where you are like very clearly inspired by Breath of the Wild, but it just seems like a nice evolution of that formula. And the stuff that I liked about it, as it turns out, you don't stop liking a thing because you did the thing. So it's just like, I'm doing more of the thing, and that's great. And I like exploring, and it's like a perfect game for if you just want to like put on a podcast and like listen to some stuff
Anything
or put
but
some music.
the dialogue in that game. Listen to anything except the dialogue in that game.
Yeah, I would say like the dialogue it actually is pretty funny. Like not everything lands, but you know what I mean? Like jokes are very subjective, so you're not gonna like everything. But it's super fun. I like the combat, the way that it evolves over time, and highly recommend it. So that was absolutely the biggest surprise because I was convinced I was not gonna like it.
Yeah, that seems to be everyone's take from what I'm seeing is people at first going like, I don't know about this. And then we're like, actually, I played it for a few hours and yeah.
Yeah.
When it got to the end of the year, which it is the end of the year, this is the last podcast of the year. When it got to putting our top 10 list together, I didn't know where to put it next to Assassin's Creed because they both kind of hit similar itches for me. And they're both, I think, really good, of a similar quality, even though they're very different takes on open world.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really love both of those games. So good choice. Marcus, what about you? What's your second game?
All right. My second game is Crash Bandicoot 4. It's About Time. So as a kid, I was a huge Crash Bandicoot fan, almost to an insufferable degree, because I grew up with Sega and Nintendo, but then when the PlayStation came around, I chose that over the N64 literally because it played disc, and I thought that was like super Jetsons futuristic, and I wanted that. So I always, literally that's the only reason. So I always am grateful for Crash for like justifying that decision early on, because that could have been a huge disaster. But I played every game in that series, and I used to love the commercials with the guy in a suit yelling at like the Nintendo headquarters. I was like, man, what a great example for me to follow. Go yell at people and tell them how good Crash Bandicoot is. And I did.
That's how you got your job here.
Yeah, I just kept yelling at Reiner over the phone. And the fourth game, I was skeptical about it going in. I didn't play the remasters. I meant to, but I just never got around to them. But I remember hearing they were good. I was like, all right, that's cool. But I was like, can they make a new one? Because the PS2 era Crashes aren't great. But yeah, this game managed to kind of capture everything that was like much like Streets of Rage 4, capture what worked about Crash, but also introducing a lot more new stuff than Streets of Rage 4 with like the different mask abilities where like some of them let you alter gravity so you can walk upside down. The other ones let you phase objects in and out of existence. And they mesh so well with the established design that it's almost amazing that they didn't exist before this game. I think that it's a great argument for that style of platforming, because no one has ever really done Crash's style of platforming, like that running down the aisle with the behind the character or anything like that. And it was one is like, maybe that just doesn't work outside of Crash. So it's kind of cool to see that that's still like, I would like to see other games try to do that, honestly. Because I had a lot of fun with that, and it was a nice break from like what we have with established platformers. And it's just a fun bit of like almost like nostalgic comfort food. Like I would just sit down and just play through, and I'm like, oh yeah, this reminds me of a simpler time before 2020, the before times, when I just didn't have to worry about anything. I just had to make sure that I changed everyone's opinions to know that Crash Bandicoot was the greatest thing that ever existed. And
challenging games too. That there's some frustrating parts in that game.
That's the other thing. That game is very hard. Like that last stage, I don't think I've ever been more proud of accomplishing anything in games than finishing that last stage. Because I think I racked up like 72 deaths by the time, like in one sitting. Like I didn't stop and like come back later. Like I did it in one sitting, like 72 deaths before I finished it. And yeah, it was a bit of an S show, but I don't know. Like I guess because those games were always hard back then too, especially that first game, which is really brutal. I think people forget how hard that first Crash Bandicoot really is. But I guess it didn't bother me as much because I was like, oh, this is what those games are. I'm glad that they even retained that element. This is just hard as hell.
Yeah, it was
but
a different time back then too.
Exactly. And but I think everything around it kind of like, if you can put up with the difficulty, I think it's great for fans of Crash and also like for fans of platformers in general that maybe only know Crash by name to kind of wonder like, oh, why was he such a big deal like 20 years ago? I think this is a great argument to go back and give it a try. So yeah, Crash 4. Awesome
you're really
game.
into these resurgence games, the old thing coming back.
Well, I don't think there's ever been a better year to be nostalgic for anything that came before than 2020. So
I always like to watch 15-year-olds being nostalgic about things too. That's super awesome.
you're like, Dad, remember the Beatles?
Joe, what are you into? Just games that are broken and keep crashing?
Yeah, well, that's one thing. Well, actually, I can keep going on the nostalgia front if we want, because another one I wanted to talk about today was Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I think for me, anyway, that was another one where like the odds were so stacked against that game in so many ways because of the reputation of the original version, and then the sort of divided opinion fans have had lately regarding Final Fantasy and Square Enix's ability to execute on that, and et cetera, to the point that it just seemed like Square had put themselves in an almost impossible position of how do we create this new game that is going to feel modern and worthwhile in a like modern RPG landscape, while at the same time satisfying these old fans with just impossibly high demands for recreating this 23-year-old game now, right? A tough position. I was so impressed by the way that game came together ultimately. Like, I think it's got the best combat system in the whole Final Fantasy series. It's got that mixture of, like, it's not so bound to turn-based stuff that it feels archaic, but it still has that element of strategy and selecting attacks from menus and things like that to still feel familiar. But then they also do the really smart thing again on the combat front of making all of your characters feel different, because the big problem in the original Final Fantasy is basically you give everyone the same material loadout and they can basically do all the same stuff. But in the remake, you're sort of bouncing between characters and each of them has different specialties. Like, Tifa gets really close and does melee combat, and Aerith can stay further away and use magic and healing and stuff like that. So I just had a lot of just sort of injected this new life into the combat system. And then you go to a step beyond that to just the way it recreates the world of that game, Midgar specifically, just that it's just follows that one city. I played that part of the original game right before I played the remake. And even though it's recognizable, it just feels so much more fleshed out and so much more oppressive and interesting, and you just get a much better sense of how that world works and the people who live in it, and all of the problems of it. I don't know, just like the characters, the world, and the things that they were able to zero in on and flesh out, like the members of Avalanche, Jesse, for instance, and how all those characters sort of took on new life, even though they were just sort of set dressing before, I guess. So, man, there's so much I can talk about with that game. A little disappointed by the ending, ultimately. Yeah. But apart from that, I just had a great time. I mean, I got the platinum trophy in that game. I just played it a lot.
It's also, aside from like the ending, just the fact that it ends and you're like, man, how long do I have to wait to play part 2? Because I'm in some ways more curious about what they're going to do with part 2 and like where they go, even though I've played the original and I know theoretically where they're going. Like, how are they going to visualize that and how different is it going to be? So
yeah, a lot of big questions that I was expecting Square to have some answers to by now. Like, I thought, the game came out in April. I thought that they'd give it a few months and then announce some plans or something, and they're just letting that marinate all year apparently. So
yeah, I wonder if COVID had anything to do with that. Like, oh, we had plans, but we kind of had to change everything. Why? So
that's possible too.
Some stuff.
Yeah, maybe. Aubrey, you have another game for us?
Yeah, real quick on the Final Fantasy front. Like, I loved Final Fantasy VII as a kid. I thought it was great. And going into the remake, my thought was, as long as they do the cross-dressing scene justice, the rest of this game can be terrible. And then on top of that, the dance sequence was so good and so well done. I'm like, this is just a fever dream of just button pressing, and I absolutely love it. So just those two moments by themselves, I'm like, this is the greatest game.
yeah. They took a scene that was in its initial incarnation a little bit like cringy and weird, and turned it into something that was a lot more just like celebratory, I think.
Super
I was nervous, like they're going to make this more cringy. I was like, I can only see this going one direction, but they made it work.
And I think that's part of it too. Like you mentioned, like people coming in with kind of just like low expectations. Like, are they actually going to pull this off? And I think with that scene in particular, expectations were even lower. They're like, there's no way.
They are going to mess this up.
No way. And then I'm like, wait a minute, Cloud's actually pretty hot. How did they pull this off?
Even mechanically, I think that scene is one of the best rhythm music moments I've ever played. Like,
I just want to play that game. Like,
yeah, like the way the notes flew in. I was like, what's the angles that the notes are coming in? Like, you don't really see that in rhythm games, but it's not incoherent. Like, I can tell what the hit, but the camera angles and the way they're coming in, I was like, that's really, really cool. And I was like, it's almost lost in like the spectacle of it all.
This is Square Enix, so I'm sure they're working on that music version right now.
I hope so. That'll come out before the next installment of the.
It'll bridge the two.
That's why they haven't announced anything. They're actually going to give you a rhythm game where the buttons fly through the arms and stuff as they're dancing. Anyway, I just had to touch on that. That was my favorite part of that game.
That's a good point.
Another game I played this year, big one, was Carto, which I think came out in October. So Twitter is already kind of a trash fire, and I think 2020 kind of exacerbated that a little bit. So one of the things that I did was I tried to just follow Twitter accounts that made me smile. And one of them is the Can You Pet the Dog account, which just shows like which video games you can actually pet dogs in. So there was one where it says, yes, you can hug the bear in Carto. And I'm like, what the hell is this thing? And it just shows like this nice like paper cutouts of this like girl and a bear just hugging. I'm like, I know nothing about this game, and I'm going to download it immediately because this GIF is the best selling point. And then I got to it in the game, and it was amazing. But Carto is just like, I was always a big fan of like really small indie games where you can just play, experience something great for a couple hours, and then move on. And this was kind of a revisit of that and the things that I used to play a lot. I love the graphical style. I love just the kind of paper cutouts. But also just the idea of like the paper cutouts kind of also becoming gameplay in and of itself, being able to move the cart pieces around. And it's like, I'm playing a game about a map. Like when you dumb it down to just like the elevator pitch, it's like playing Journey. Like you're playing a game about walking. Like it sounds so simple when you distill it down, but really it's just this really great story about family and friendship, and you can hug a bear. And
and it's like, I love the art style. I haven't played it, unfortunately, but it is on my backlist because I'd love to dive in, and it sounds right up my alley. It's a cool
Marcus
game,
played
it
it.
sounds like. Yeah, you like the Marcus?
Yeah, that game's really cool. That game it does some really clever, like it's about making maps, but the way they kind of design puzzles around that and make you use the map making mechanic in more out of the box ways is, I think, where that game really shines. Like there's like a puzzle where you have to like open a combination lock using the map mechanics, and it's like a really well thought out, like, oh, okay, that's pretty smart. Like I wouldn't have thought of that.
I also like the way that they increase the difficulty. Like before, it's just every map piece is square, and then you get a couple that are different shapes until eventually it kind of becomes full blown Tetris, where you've got T shapes and L shapes, but then there's different kinds of terrain that you have to match up. But it doesn't feel like it ever really gets harder because it introduces everything at a very good pace.
Yeah, sure. Cool. Well, excellent choice. Good reminder to go back and play that. I want to talk about a game that I feel sort of bad talking about because I keep bringing it up, but it's Half-Life Alyx. And I love that game. I love talking about it. The reason I feel sort of bad bringing it up is because, like, I know why people aren't playing it. Like, I know why people haven't had a chance. Like, I'm sure there's millions of people out there who are like, yeah, shut up. If I had the VR system, I'd play it. But
stop bragging.
But it really is one of my favorite games of the year, and just the use of VR that Valve used to create this game. You feel like you're in the world. There's so many things you can like pick up and play with, just like picking up markers and playing with a marker or throwing a bottle across the screen. It is used in the game mechanically sometimes, but doing the thing is fun in and of itself. And then, the shooting's good, the puzzles are good. It's really just cool story that they told. I don't think I've been more excited for Half-Life in a really long time. So it was fun to have like a real Half-Life game, and it's a full big AAA release in VR. So if you have VR and you haven't played it, you're being a fool. But I understand
that first group is a very like
very small.
Well, you just cut out like 90% of people. So.
But I understand if you're not like VR's not for me. I'm not going to spend that money on it. But if you have the chance at all, you really need to do yourself a favor and check that game out. All right,
it's like
Jeff
recommending that people eat In-N-Out for dinner tonight. It's like, yeah, I'd love to.
More people will eat In-N-Out tonight than will play VR.
You're probably correct on that.
I used to work in VR, so I feel like I'm justified saying that.
Oh, nice. Perfect. Have you played Half-Life Alyx then?
No, because I no longer work in VR, which means I don't have a headset.
Bummer. All right, Jeff Cork, what do you got for us?
This one I could like go either way. Just honorable mention real quick is Ghost of Tsushima. That was like absolutely like probably my favorite game of the year, depending on the day. It was so good. But anyway, This time I'm going to talk about Yakuza Like a Dragon. It's kind of continuing the trend with me going into something thinking, I don't know, because I'm a fan of the Yakuza series. I was a little skeptical about the shift over to a turn-based combat, just because I don't play a lot of JRPGs, because I typically like real-time action. So went into it kind of a little iffy, but immediately won over. I just love the cast. I love the setting. I love that it's a vibrant city that has neon, but you can actually do things in the world, which is nice. It's not just like a Wild West facade where you're like, oh, wow, look at that 2-story building. And then you will look at it from the side and you're like, wait a second, that top story is just a 2-dimensional cutout. But anyway, sorry, Joe. I just love everything about it. I think it's so much fun. I like the job system. I like the Ichiban's like positive attitude about everything. I think that all the characters are super interesting. Well, maybe one of them is kind of mediocre, but for the most part, they're all really engaging, and they just feel like they're people that are getting to know each other and developing relationships and respecting each other. And it's just fun because it feels like you're kind of hanging out with friends and kind of nurturing these relationships as you play, which is a feeling you don't often get. That was probably one of my favorite things about Red Dead Redemption 2, is just kind of that same feeling of like, we're kind of a group of outlaws, although these guys are the good guys. So if you're squeamish about being a bad guy, you should play Like a Dragon.
And one of the things I'm in the midst of playing Like a Dragon. I haven't finished it yet, but one of the things that I feel like people don't talk about enough in the Yakuza games in general is that like those sub stories that are presented, or they sort of look like, oh, these are side quests that I can do or not do. And like the more of these these style of games that I've played, because I played like Judgment and some of Yakuza 0 also, is like those are the game.
Absolutely.
As interesting as the main story is, and the characters that you talk about, Jeff, like for me, the heart of the Yakuza experience is just walking around and doing absurd, ridiculous side quests for people. That is the best part of this game.
And what I think what Like a Dragon does really well, like building on that point, is that usually those side stories, you do them and you're kind of like have a heartwarming moment, you get a little XP bump. But this time they've got that pound mate system, which is essentially being able to like summon characters in the middle of combat. And a lot of the side stories, when you finish them, they will join you in some way as like an optional, like this one guy, for instance, he's like a homeless guy and he's befriended this crawfish. And if you finish this mission, you'll be able to call in basically a rain of crawfish from the sky and they'll attack enemies for you. And it's just like a nice tangible reward for also kind of going out of your way and exploring all that side content, which is great.
And there's also a huge business mini game, and some of these quests give you characters that you can recruit into your business. Like I legitimately just full stop didn't advance the main story anymore and just played this business mini game for 6 straight hours until I maxed it out. and then went back to the game. I was so into it. Anyway.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
heard that there's. I've also been playing and loving this game, and I heard there's a point in which the game gets really hard and you have to grind a lot. Is that something that? Is there anything way to set yourself up so you don't have to like worry about that too much?
Do lots of side content and do like when you see a random battle, don't run away from it.
Sure.
You may still have to grind a little bit, but it's doable.
Yeah, you didn't feel like that was too much of an issue when you played.
No.
Sounds like.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that Pokemon system does a good job of emphasizing going after those side or those random battles too. Like even when I was like, I don't really fighting this guys, but I don't think I've seen that person and I want to catalog them. So they kind of cover their base there too.
Awesome.
Oh, it's a good game.
Yeah, I got to get back to that one for sure. Marcus, what's your last game?
Okay, well, real quick, much like Jeff shouting out Ghost of Tsushima, I'm going to shout out Hades, which is my actual personal game of the year. It's a wonderful game, one of the best ever. But I want to talk about Spider-Man Miles Morales, which is also in my top 10 of the year. And I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. I have been a kid, love Peter Parker, also love Miles. And this game kind of, it's more of that 2018 game, but it's a smaller scope, but a more personal story. And I think I like it as much as the 2018 game just for different reasons. Where instead of it being this blown out kind of like superhero epic where we're going to cram in as many characters and villains as we can in this, it's like, what if we just zoomed out and just focus on Miles, the character, and his coming of age story and what it's like for his community, because it just takes place only in Harlem, and how they react to like, oh, we have our own Spider-Man who's like really down to earth and really like looking out for us down here, and getting to know the individual Harlem citizens when you're doing like the side missions for them and seeing how Miles interacts with them was some of the most heartwarming stuff of anything this year, and just kind of endears yourself to Miles even more as a character. And then watching him just kind of like stumble and grow on his own is his first foray as Spider-Man by himself since Peter's away. It's super relatable, which has always been one of the key things of both Spider-Man and why they're so appealing. Is like, oh, I see myself in that guy. And I've always felt like that with Peter, and I feel like that with Miles with this game. And the conflict itself wasn't as like strong as like the 2018 game. I didn't mind it. It's not like this giant like A-list of villains or anything like that. But I think the villain that mattered, I think they did a good job making that meaningful. And also I'm learning that Insomniac,
like a good in-boss fight, like even though if you weren't invested in the story, like I think that mechanically it was a fun combat sequence.
Yeah, that, and as well as that Rhino fight in the beginning is
that thing was
fantastic.
Great.
Yeah. And then that game has also shown me, because like I'm a huge rationing guy. Those Spider-Man games, they've taught me that they can really write like emotional script, because both of those games end with some real tear-jerking moments. And it's almost made me like, oh wow, like you guys made me almost cry between these two like superhero games. So yeah, I'm excited for the next game. I don't know where they go, honestly, in terms, I think they've done a good job with Miles' power set, like his Venom powers and his invisibility, turning those into fun gameplay mechanics, to the point where I almost worried of like, if you go back to Peter, he technically has less abilities. Is he going to be less fun? Because playing as Miles is such a blast, but Peter can't turn invisible or shoot electricity out of his hands.
They'll figure something out, I hope. But yeah,
I think
Peter gets
ice power.
Another spider.
A second spider.
A more powerful spider.
Like, Miles, hit me with that spider that got you.
Miles, why don't you try biting me? We'll see if that works.
Oh, that's good.
So like Spiderception? Like,
yeah, they just keep biting each other.
It changes.
To go deeper.
It changes Peter's face again too.
This is good.
It's a good thing this is the last episode of year. Joe, you got a final game you want to talk about?
Yeah. Well, so the talk about is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which you guys mentioned a little bit when you talked about Gods and Monsters or Immortals or whatever it is now. But for me, I think what makes Assassin's Creed Valhalla so interesting is, as someone who's been like following and playing this series since the very first game, I've seen all of the sort of different experiments that Ubisoft has tried over the years, like going from the formula of the first game to going a little more open world in the second game. Then they started adding in like kind of base management a little bit and brotherhood, and like it keeps building in different ways. Then it reinvented itself as an RPG in the last few years. So like all of these different things that they've tried, and it's gotten to the point where just Assassin's Creed as a franchise has done too much to put in a single game. So they have to be really smart about what they pick and choose and which elements they include and to what degree. And for me anyway, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is just like the perfect balance of all of the things that I love about Assassin's Creed games, right? It's got a little bit of the naval stuff because you have a ship that you used to get around, but it doesn't get too in the weeds with naval combat. And it has like crafted assassination sequences that feel deliberately designed rather than just like procedural in the world. And it really figures itself out in terms of what it wants to be as an RPG, and in terms of the combat and the skills and abilities that you earn and all of that stuff. It just and then the settlement building. I forgot about that where it just gives you this hub that you're slowly building up and like bringing friends to and stuff like that. So you have this persistent element of progression there. And then finally they solved what was my biggest complaint about Odyssey, which is just like the repetition of content. I felt like Odyssey had too much just, okay, you're going to go infiltrate a base. You're going to go take out a bandit camp. Now take out another bandit camp. And I feel like Valhalla just does a great job of all of the things that are out in the world for you to do. There is a wider variety of them, and they don't all feel like they're just sort of copy paste quest objectives, right?
They did a good job of like the main story is a little more streamlined and feels more bespoke, let's say, but then there's also like lots of like cool things to explore out in the world. Like I had more fun exploring this open world than I've had fun exploring in an Assassin's Creed game in a long time, I think.
Yeah. Well, and they get away from the standard like side questy stuff too. So you don't just have this giant checklist of objectives that you need to do. The stuff that you can do out in the world are just these. I love these little stories. I forget what they call them, world events, maybe.
I think, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, or mysteries, but they're all these just like very authored and clever quests that are around the world that sometimes just take a minute or two to finish. It's just you have a conversation with someone, you do a quick thing for them, and it's over. But they feel like they were deliberately crafted for that person and that place in the game. So they're just a bunch of clever, whether it's you run into a guy with an axe stuck in his head, and you run into someone who's like weirdly worshiping a bunch of cats, and like they all have weird.
Why is that weird, Joe?
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
It's not weird.
Yeah.
What's wrong?
Yeah. So it's that kind of it's a kind of game where I was playing it. I mean, it took me 70 hours to finish the game when I was reviewing it. And even then I kept playing it afterwards and was still running into things that were surprising me. So I had a great time with that one.
Perfect choice. Yeah. Another great game. Cool. Aubrey, got anything else for us?
Yeah. So I'm kind of going to depart a little bit, and I played a ton of the Pikmin 3 remake. I know it's initially didn't come out in 2020, but
that's fair game. It counts.
It counts. It counts because there's new content, and I think that's the thing that like I really got sucked into. Is Pikmin at its core is very much you have so many minutes to get stuff done, and all of your ammo is really cute and sing songs when they're like walking from one point A to point B. But there's all of these little bits of story that they tie in with all the different spacemen that you have on your ship, whether it's like the guys that are there, the three main dudes, or they go back and revisit Olimer and Louis. And there's all of these great little bits of story that I kind of just missed the first time. And I think it's really easy to forget how great Pikmin 3 was because it came out when the Wii U was the thing. And as someone who created a Wii U launch title, I often forget about the Wii U. So this was a nice reminder that like Nintendo really, really knows how to do a specific mechanic really well, as long as they completely go full in on it. And having a real-time strategy game that is both cute and extremely violent, but which is both relaxing and stressful, is just this great, great combination of everything. And I'm so happy that they re-released it and that I'm playing it again. It's also really great because like this job requires me to travel a lot. So I'm often on the road and I don't have access to home consoles anymore. So a lot of my gaming ends up being on the Switch, and I got a Switch Lite this year and it's great and I love it. So something like Pikmin is really awesome because it's like, oh, I'm just going to play a day. And you feel like you got a good amount of content in and you don't feel like, oh, well, I need to keep playing. It's like, no, I played something good. I achieved something. I got some fruit today. This was awesome.
Nice.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, like, two things. First, is there anything better than the sloshing juice at the end of the day? It is like the most satisfying thing to see that. It looks, it's perfect, that moment.
So as a game developer, I love little details like that, where it's like each fruit has its own color of juice. And then watching the juices meld to create a new color at the end of the day. And it completely depends on the order of the fruits you got to determine the color of the juice. And I'm sure if I say any of this out loud, people think I'm crazy.
No,
like,
I know exactly what you mean.
I mean, like normal people, not people on a game podcast. You can go walk up to someone on the street and go, did you know if you combine plum juice and lemon juice, you will get a vibrant orange color? Like people are like, this woman is crazy. Please lock her up. But yes, and your second thing.
Oh, second thing. Did you play any of it co-op by any chance?
Yeah, so I actually just played the co-op a little bit with my husband. Funny enough, I actually started playing Mario Odyssey again because Nintendo's selling a version of the Pro Controller with a free download of Odyssey currently.
Oh, nice.
So I'm like, oh yeah, no, this game was good too. Let me keep playing this.
Yeah.
So we played the co-op, which was great because he had never ever played a Pikmin game before.
Oh.
And I've played all of them very, very extensively. So the thing I love about the co-op, very much like the bingo battles, which I was like, I don't know, this could be good. But the fact that you can make it like handicapped, like he would start with 50 Pikmin and I'd start with 5 and I'd still kick his ass. And I felt so good about myself.
How did he feel though?
Because the original release, it only had the bingo battles. You didn't have you couldn't play the campaign co-op. And that was one of my favorite things about the deluxe edition is because I played that with my older kid. And then we were just like, at the beginning of the day, it's like, all right, I'm grabbing red, I'm going north. You grab blue. And then like we would have a game plan and we would finish the day and get everything we needed to do. Like, well, now what? It's got to be like so efficient at stuff. It was the best feeling.
It feels really good.
I really enjoyed the co-op. I think the problem is like my gameplay style, because my time is so limited, I just try and complete things as quickly as possible. But he's very much a let's go and explore type thing, which means that like if we play games too much, we'll be divorced. Like that's just the reality. Our play styles do not match, which is why I think like Bingo Battle worked a lot better for us because it's like I'm just gonna destroy you.
Perfect. Well, good luck with that marriage.
Thank you.
So many more games this year. I have one more game to talk about, and I feel like it's a big one. So hopefully we don't lose like half our audience now. But I want to talk about The Last of Us Part 2.
Bye.
Okay, wow, we lost half of our crew. Yeah, like Last of Us Part 2, I think for me I expected it to be like my number one game of the year going in, and it wasn't, surprisingly, but I still really loved it. It's still really high on my list of games that I just had a really good time playing with. And I think the story I'm going to try to do this without spoilers too, but like the story they told felt meaningful. The characters that they created felt like real people, and like I grew to appreciate them. And like when they were hurting, like I kind of felt that too. So, and then I actually do enjoy the game too. I think it was actually a pretty solid stealth game in there as well. So I had a lot of fun with it. Did everybody else here play it?
Yeah, finish it.
Yeah, so I think that proves it's a good game. But Aubrey, you said you didn't even play it because you did. I don't know if I'm outing you, but you didn't like the first one. Is that right?
Yeah, controversial opinion. I hated the first Last of Us. So when the second one came out, I'm like, well, I'm skipping it. Full disclosure, I'm afraid of the dark and I don't like zombies. So already this game is not for me. But I went into it knowing that. I think part of it was Naughty Dog had always done so many great games. Like the Uncharted series was fantastic. Everything that they do is gold. So when the first one came out, I'm like, I have to play this. I can't just watch a Let's Play because this is something that's being hailed as like a storytelling masterpiece. Like, let's just, put aside the fact I sleep with the lights on, put aside the fact that it's like zombies are kind of creepy and whatnot. And it's like, I'm going to play it. And I didn't like it. mostly because I felt a lot of the story was presented purely in cinematics and all of the gameplay was in gameplay. So it felt like it was a combination of both oil and water. And everyone's saying it's this great storytelling thing, but it's like, yeah, but all the stories were movies. Like all I did was like sit in the dark and wait for clicking to stop. Like, and I didn't like the ending. That could be a podcast in and of itself. But I think because of that, that was the biggest reason why I skipped Last of Us 2. But I have a lot of friends who worked on the game, and I know that it's very well received by many, many people. And I'm happy that all of the developers are finding the success that they are. So
Sure.
I can hate on it, but I'm happy that my friends are happy.
Totally fine. I just wanted to highlight it as a game that I really enjoyed, and I think a lot of people on staff enjoyed it as well. But in terms of your points, I think for me, like the first game still has a narrative that I appreciate a little bit more. But I really like what they did with the second game narratively. Maybe it hangs around a little bit longer. I think it could have been tightened up and it would have been a better game. But I think mechanically, gameplay wise, they tighten up a lot of things, and I feel like it's a better gameplay experience. So I really appreciated it from that aspect as well. So
I think it's a really interesting game, and I appreciate a lot about it. Technically, it didn't make my top 10 of the year, but I think it's a solid game. I think it's possible to have criticisms about it that are completely valid and not. I think it's become so polarized too, where it's almost impossible to have like a normal human to human conversation about it without feeling like you're joining like a faction they have to ride or die, which I don't know. I've watched videos that are people that really hate it and people that really like it, and I find that debate fascinating. Like people have really internalized things, and they're talking about Neil Druckmann like he's a person that they have interacted with and know about because of like a sentence or two he said in an interview, and they have like this whole persona built up about this guy, and like it's very strange. But
that's wrestling in general, so I know what you're talking about.
I feel like you're adding a lot of like qualifiers or being a little skittish around this. I mean, we can say straight up, like The Last of Us Part 2 was selected as Game Informer's #1 game of the year.
Oh yeah, surprise!
It's our game. Oh no, and Jeff, to your point, like it is totally. You're right. It is totally fair for people to have criticisms about that, but I don't think I also don't feel like I want to bury the enthusiasm for it there either, because like I mean, for me personally, like it is my game of the year, and I think that it does a lot to show. Again, it's really hard to dig into without spoiling it in a lot of ways. So I guess I can't get too far into it, but on the storytelling front, but there is just that element of, I think video games, a lot of times the narrative trades in very recognizable, like archetypes and events, and has a tendency to, like, different games remix them, but a lot of times you're dealing with things that are very familiar. And one of the things that I really appreciated about The Last of Us 2 is how I felt like it made a very deliberate effort to avoid the easy roads and avoid the paths that players have walked before. And this is not to say that novelty is necessarily a virtue in and of itself.
Yeah.
But I feel like Naughty Dog did a wonderful job, like doing things that I did not expect or even think they would do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's a good point. Like there's a lot of surprises in that game. And that's what I like when I go into an experience. So if you can surprise me, like I definitely appreciate that.
And not only
real quick, like the characters do things that are surprising, and I think that's one of the things people have a real problem with the story narratively, is that they see characters behaving in ways that disappoint them. But I think that's that's a deliberate decision. That's
good storytelling.
Yeah, that's
exactly
that's how people are.
I was gonna say you should interact with people and you'll be disappointed and blown away and impressed, and like you'll feel all kinds of things. But just like I feel like everything that the characters did, even if I thought it sucked so hard and I hated the characters as they were doing it, I'm like, well, I can kind of understand why this happened. Mm-hmm. It's not, I mean, we also have the benefit of like, I can move the camera around and see what's happening behind these characters. Like, I feel like I'm like the eye of God. So I have this perspective that the characters who were stuck in this world don't have, but whatever.
Yeah. Also, the only game that's ever given me pause whenever I killed someone, like usually when I play games, I'm like a little on, like, not my problem. But like the sound design in this game, and it goes back to like the overall theme of the game of like the consequences of people's actions, even extending to gameplay of like, oh, I just took a spiked bat to this guy's neck, and instead of just like dying instantly, he's like on the ground like gurgling with this just incredible sound, like some of the best sound design I've ever seen. Where he's like gurgling on the ground like for like 30 seconds, and you're just like, oh my god, I did that. Like that was me. Like I did that. And then his friends in the background like, Phil, and you're like, oh,
Where is he?
Yeah.
And then you do it to his dog.
Oh god,
And
the
then you feel
dogs are
even
the
worse.
worst. Like I didn't mind killing the dogs for the mindset of like, well, it's either me or you. I don't want to do this, but I'm being mauled right now. But it always got me when the person would realize that you killed their dogs. You would just hear the heartache in their voice when they would call for their dog. And you're like, I'm so sorry, but I had to do it. I'm sorry. It's
the other thing I really want to call out about that game too is I think that there's a level of craftsmanship in the world, like in the environment, the way that it's not just like in so many games, it's like, well, we're going to design one convenience store, and then we're just going to put that same, just going to stamp that same convenience store on the corner of every block. Like every interior space that you're going into feels deliberately designed. Every exterior space that you're in feels very deliberately designed to show like how this sort of post-apocalyptic world has changed and, you know, adapted to the things that are going on in it. Like I like being able to walk around in a store or something, and you can almost always like piece together a little story of what happened here, right? Like, okay, there were some people who were holed up in this store, but then a bunch of clickers got in, and then you kill one of the clickers and realize like, oh, this is the clicker that ate that person who wrote that note over there. You know, it's like, it's all these stories are just, as incidental as they may be, they're also connected, and they do a lot to make that world just feel authentic. I love that game.
Yeah, it's a great game. I want to go revisit it again at some point. So great. Well, that was kind of a fun look back at 2020 in a nutshell, and we definitely didn't cover all the games that we loved in the year, but hopefully we highlighted a good number of them. And if you haven't played them all, like there's some good options there for you to go back and check out. Great. Should we take a break, everybody, and come back for some emails?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're here for some community emails. The gang's still around. We're going to answer some emails. These are emails that you send in, podcast@gameinformer.com. Ask us a question, help us play a game, send us characters to rank. We'll take it all. Podcast@gameinformer.com. Emails such as this one. Mike from Mansfield, New Jersey writes in, and they say, I wanted to write in and talk about the recent release of Cyberpunk 2077. I'm a huge fan of CD Projekt Red's games. Witchers 2 and 3 are two of my favorite games of all time. I was extremely excited for Cyberpunk and had the game day one for console, but I haven't played it yet because I'm still working my way through Spider-Man. Anyway, long story. Yeah, what'd you have for dinner that night, Mike? Come on. Anyway, he says he started hearing the criticisms about the game. He does have a PS5, so he knows it'll run better on that, but he's still sort of debating if he wants to play it or maybe even return it. This left me wondering if there was ever any game that you guys felt fell out of favor with you because you were extremely excited to play it before, but then you heard about poor performance or bad reviews or whatever, and then you got less excited.
Yeah. For me, the big one is a fairly recent one. That's Anthem, which, you know, I'm someone who's historically loved almost every BioWare game I've played to some degree. And I was really excited because I'd not quite the idea of the sort of like hobby games, the ones that are like the live games that you can just sort of play for a long period of time with friends, pop in every now and then. Like those had never quite hit with me. And I thought Anthem was going to be the one to do that for me. Or if nothing else, like if I wasn't sure it would do that, at least I felt like if there ever was one that would hook me, it would be this, right? Like with BioWare storytelling, with this flying around the world Iron Man style with a bunch of loot, and like it looked like it was for me. To the point that I actually convinced a couple of my friends to play it. Me and Matt, fellow GI editor Matt Miller were, playing with them, and I ended up just sort of apologizing to my friends that I convinced, because we played like one night and they were just like,
Oh no.
this sucks. Like, yeah, it does. It does. I didn't even finish that. I didn't even finish the story of that game. I just had to stall out. And first I was just waiting for patches. And now, 2 years later, I'm just waiting for the good version of it to come out.
Joe, I think you owe them money.
What's your refund policy?
It's passed. The window's closed, unfortunately.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
I'm going to submit a receipt anyway. The Anthem was actually going to be my choice. It was so bad. The reception was so bad that I actually never even touched it. I haven't played it, period. So maybe I dodged a bullet. Another one that comes to mind that's similar is Fallout 76, where I wasn't like over the moon excited for it, but I was like kind of like, oh, it's been a while. I kind of want another Fallout. There's things about this that maybe look a little wonky, but I'm still excited. And then when the game rolled out and I found out that it was more broken than I think I wanted it to be, I quickly bailed on it. I was kind of disappointed that wasn't better. Although I haven't played it in a while, and I heard they've done a lot of work on it, so maybe it's better.
Yeah, those are great examples. I had like a similar experience where Mass Effect Andromeda, I've never touched that. As I like Mass Effect games, all right, and just bought that one and just have not even bothered, because there was a while where it was just like this cadence of updates and promises that were being made. And I think I reached a point too, like last year, Joe, I was like, is it safe to play that now? And you seemed like, yeah, it's good. It's good. And I was like, all right, that's not enthusiastic enough for me. Well,
I mean, that's partially because you were also in a place of like, you're not necessarily a huge Mass Effect fan. Like you said, you like the games out. You like those games, all right.
Right.
And like, Andromeda is a hard game to recommend, even though I personally enjoyed it.
Good choices.
Yeah, I would say I don't have a game answer for this. So this might be cheating because I'm a big sucker and I tend to actually buy these things and then discover after the fact that I don't like them. But the Xbox One was that for me, of like being excited
the whole
for
console.
That. Yeah, like the whole console of like, because I had the 360 and the PS3, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna get both. It'd be awesome, of course. And then, from the moment they rolled it out with their weird media focused thing, and then the always online stuff, and like everything around that thing of like I can't remember the last time I was so turned off on this thing I was so excited about, to being like, what are, like, you guys are actively sabotaging your own platform. Like, I was like questioning, like, this can't be real. Like, they can't think that this is all a good idea that people are going to be okay with. And I would just like, those months leading up to release, I was just flabbergasted at every turn at like every little thing about that. What are they doing? And then I wound up not buying one for a good year and a half, probably until after launch or so. Like by then they had pretty much, obviously reversed all that before I was like, okay, now I'll get one. But yeah,
I think that's how everybody feels about their Wii U too. It's just like, well, I guess I played Mario Kart and Pikmin, which I could have just waited and played those on the Switch. But
I hear it had a really good launch game, though.
It did. It had Scribblenauts Unlimited, which was a super fun launch game. I just put myself over a little bit.
All right, next email. Steve from Buffalo, New York writes in. He says, after the announcement that Sephiroth would be in Smash, it had me thinking that since you can have alternative skins, what is it? Where is this going? With shirts off and nipples chest out? Okay.
This is a game podcast.
They type that with their pants off.
Here's a note. Remember to pre-read these. Let's see. Steve is asking, I have never purchased a strictly cosmetic skin for any character ever, but it made me wonder if there was ever a time that the GI crew saw a skin and said, shut up, take my money because I need that. No judgment here. You can include skin pics
Yeah.
if you want. That's what it says. But that was the case. That was the case for me. But what about you guys?
I mean, Jeff, you were talking about Fortnite.
No,
Fortnite, right?
that was
Fortnite?
I was just making that up. How ridiculous! Oh, unbelievable. Yeah.
No, for me, the one was they had Xbox avatars. What? God, was that only on 360? Did that not make it over to Xbox One?
They're on
think those
Xbox
were
One, but
strictly
they were never incorporated.
Yeah, they were kind of hidden at some point.
Okay, so this was way back in the Xbox, like at the tail end of the Xbox 360's lifespan. Maybe the one had even launched at that point. They released an avatar outfit for $5 of RoboCop.
Mhm.
That you could just your avatar could just look like RoboCop. And I bought that immediately without hesitation. And it is still like, it is still my little profile picture. It is still, whenever a game uses an avatar, I'm still wearing my RoboCop thing. Like that is, I did that immediately.
Does it have a
Mhm.
beard?
No, I had it. I sort of redid my face a little bit so it didn't have the beard and it could, still look. I don't want to be RoboCop with a beard. That looks ridiculous.
I don't know. Could be cool.
Yeah. But one of the great things about it though is there are a handful of games that actually use your avatar, like Kingdom for Keflings, for instance, which is a 360 game that I loved. Your avatar is just like your character. You walk around, you pick up little guys, and you set them to construction tasks and stuff. So I'm just walking around, bossing these little elves around as RoboCop. It is great.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I've never actually paid money for a skin in a game, but there occasionally there'll be skins where it's like, ooh, that's really good. There was in Miles Morales, which we talked about, that skin where you were basically the version of Miles from Into the Spider-Verse with like the special animation stuff, which looked so cool. Like I might have been tempted to buy that if it wasn't just free in the game.
Yeah, I bought the. I don't really buy skins either. Mortal Kombat is the only series that has kind of pushed me over that line. Like for X and 11 especially, I probably buy all the skins that come on there like day one. The one that really got me with 11 was the classic Shang Tsung skin from the movie because I love that Mortal Kombat movie so much. And now they've dropped that movie pack, which I forgot to go buy, and now that it just popped in my head, I have to do that, guys. So, but yeah, that was one where I saw it. I was like, oh, you may as well just take my wallet now. It's already gone. So
yeah, I think like Fortnite in particular is dialed into my specific brand of stupidity. So that's what makes it so tempting is like they'll just have like costumes. Like they had one recently where it's just like a guy in a Christmas sweater and pants or whatever, and then his head was a snow globe. And it was just like
That's really good.
Damn it. Wish I hadn't seen that. I didn't end up buying that one actually, but it's just like I could be that. And then then I am that, and then I'm like, hey, it's the same stupid game.
Does that tap into your weakness more, like stupid stuff like that, more than just like, oh, here's the thing that I really love, like, oh, I could be Darth Vader or like Spider-Man? You're not as into that. You'd rather be just like some weird
I think it's
creature.
probably like a 70-30 split. I just really appreciate their artists are allowed to indulge just the dumbest BS, which is pretty great.
All right. Esteban from Chile writes in, he says, at the end of the year, when talking about the best games in certain genres, how do you guys go about comparing games? For example, when you choose the best shooter of the year, would you pick the best game that is a shooter or the game that is has the best shooting mechanics? There have been some very good games that have been best shooter, but they had weak shooting mechanics. I think just to chime in, like one example that comes to me is like kind of the BioShock games maybe is a good example of like those are amazing games, but like if you measure them just by the shooting, they maybe don't measure up to something like Doom, for example. So what do you guys think?
I think that question hits on a sore spot that comes up every year as we try to award different games, different genre awards. And I know Jeff feels the pain on this one because I feel like every year that we go into one of those meetings, Jeff is like, hey, before we start this meeting, can we please just lay down some clear guidelines of how we are judging these? And I feel like
it down immediately every year. You idiot, you absolute moron. Why would we need to do this? The next day, chaos. What are we judging this by? What are the parameters? Oh,
yeah. And I think the answer to that is that it's just a little fuzzy, right? That we kind of play it by ear every year, and take it on a game by game basis. There's a lot of context to consider with some of that stuff. So it's like it's hard to say it's just one thing or the other. It's always like it depends on the two games that you're comparing. It depends on the genres that you're talking about. All of that stuff. So it's always just like we lock ourselves in a room and we just kind of hash it out and figure out how we feel about it.
I think you're right. It's not like a clear-cut answer. I think we tend to probably lean towards the best game that fits in that genre. Like if we're picking the best shooter, it's like this is the best this game is technically a shooter and it's the best game. Like I think
Yeah.
we lean that direction most of the time.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably not a hard and fast rule, but I like, for instance, this year The Last of Us is our game of the year, so I think we're just sort of like by default that's best action game. You can maybe say that a game like Doom Eternal or Hades has better action, but The Last of Us is an action game and it is our game of the year, so
Right.
you know, I mean, that argument makes sense to me, but I think there are also times, like you say, where if you're talking about something like shooting mechanics specifically, you would maybe want to highlight something like Destiny over something like BioShock, right? So yeah, it's a conversation. It's a sore point that comes up every year. So it's a good question, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Aubrey, you probably don't have to debate this too often with anybody at work, but do you have friends? Do you ever get into conversations with friends where you're like, well, this is better than this? You're like, that's apples and oranges to some degree, right?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like you have to look at the holistic experience, right? Like if you look at something from just a gameplay mechanic, it's like it might speak out to one thing, but I mean, no one really looks at Pikmin and thinks it's a, real-time strategy game. They just think it's like adorable little plants that are yelling at each other when they get eaten by other monsters. But like from a mechanic standpoint, it falls under a specific genre. But as games have evolved as a medium, there's many games that fall under different buckets. So it's like everything eventually is just action adventure. So it's more or less identifying the games that are really good and then figuring out where they tend to fit into the specific categories, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and everything has RPG mechanics in it these days.
Yeah.
Remember when,
and even then, like Final Fantasy VII, right? It's like a completely different departure from what the old battle system was, but it still has a very traditional RPG mechanic. So is it now action adventure? Like, where do you draw the line in those cases?
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember when Ratchet and Clank started doing the RPG stuff and felt so novel. You're like, oh, I love RPG mechanics. They're putting them in this platformer action game. That's great. And now it's like, yeah, of course. Like every game has some kind of RPG system in it. It feels like.
Right. Like I played a lot of Paper Mario Origami King this year, which is an RPG. But whenever someone hears Mario, they immediately think platformer. And even then, as an RPG, I think the RPG mechanic sucks. I hated the ring circle thing. It was like, this is so dumb. Like all I'm doing is jumping on guys anyway. Why would you present this as a different game? Just make Mario with paper art. Then it's good. But yeah, it's like sometimes we're shoehorning things into specific categories, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I think one of the things about genres is it's like, I think it's nice at the end of the year. It's a nice way to actually recognize good games. Like I see that as the primary value of those genre distinctions is really just an avenue to say, hey, this is the best RPG, like whatever you'd want to say, Yakuza Like a Dragon, best RPG of 2020. It's really just an excuse to say, hey, Yakuza Like a Dragon is a really good game. You should play it. When it comes to like just how genres don't really guide my personal gaming choice anymore. It's not like, oh, I'm a big RPG guy, because it's like RPG, open world, action, adventure, all like the lines are just too blurry for all of that stuff anymore to have it draw like any firm boundaries for what I want to play. I don't know.
I think even like just kind of the opposite of that. I think genres of games are actually the thing that turn me away from specific things. Like back when I was younger, I would play RPGs all the time because I was a kid with free time. And now I essentially have 2 jobs. So now I'm looking for something that is a very short, compartmentalized experience. So I'm actually turned away from specific things because they're put into specific boxes.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So you see RPG and you're like, that's going to be 80 hours. I'm never going to
finish that. I don't have enough time. I'll finish it when I'm 80. Like, no. Versus I'm like, oh, this 10-hour indie game, I could totally do that. That's 2 plane rides. Like, I'm just basing everything based on how much time it takes for me to plan an airplane.
Yeah. Even now, huh?
No, pretty much. Yeah, we're still traveling.
It's crazy. Yeah, there is part of me that regrets like starting Yakuza and Cyberpunk and Assassin's Creed all at the same time. It's like, well,
Yeah, I did the same
You did it to
thing,
yourself. You did it to yourself.
I did. Okay, we have a list we're kind of putting together of required reading. Do you guys remember this? we're asking people to send in lists of like, here's games that if you love games, you should play this game. Kind of a list. It's kind of like the idea of like, if you're a cinephile, you should probably watch Citizen Kane or something, whatever crap they're into. Or like if you're at all into like the human race, you should watch Star Wars. That kind of stuff. So
we do a very similar thing with wrestling. Like if you want to be a wrestling fan, you need to watch these specific matches. And then that introduces totally.
For sure.
What's like the number one, you think?
Oh man, like Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair. That always ends up being top of the list. Ultimate Warrior and Hogan. More recently, probably Cody Rhodes versus Dustin Rhodes at Double or Nothing last year, where everyone's just a bloody mess. Really, really good match about like story and brotherhood and all of these other concepts that you see in other media. But so everyone's bleeding, so it's great.
Awesome.
Yeah, that.
Oof. Yeah, that's cool. I've definitely seen a couple of those matches, so I have to go back and. Joe, have you watched wrestling much? You've watched some, right?
No,
not at all.
That's
no,
okay.
Not really.
All right.
No, I was
because you'll get obsessed, and like in 5 years you'll be.
Well, no, it really comes down to like the most wrestling I watched when I was younger, right? So it was like I watched some wrestling when it was like Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Big Boss Man. Yep. It's basically all the characters in that one video game with Ted DiBiase and Andre the Giant in it. That was the era of wrestling that I was a little plugged into it. But
it was a good era.
Yeah, golden age.
Well, with that in mind, we've started to put together a list. We're asking people to send in their ideas on like what we should add to our list. So far, we've come up with Chrono Trigger and The Last of Us, the first one. So we're like, hey, you should really check these games out if you're into games. We have a couple more. I was thinking we could run down and just see like, all right, well, what do you guys think? Do these deserve to be on this list? So the first one that somebody wrote in, Dustin wrote in and said, I want to definitively mention Diablo 2 as required reading. It's the epitome of the ARPG style, and it paved the way for many games that have come today. I love the haunting atmosphere and music, and it's such a wonderful experience. It's to video games as Black Sabbath is to metal.
Oof.
What do you guys think?
See, I've never played Diablo 3 as my only Diablo 2 high school, and there were like the two punk rock kids that had a lot of hymn merchandise that would like not stop talking about Diablo 2. Like literally every day they sat next to me and would just go on and on about what they did, and it got annoying.
It's funny because I have a very similar experience with Diablo 2 where I dated this guy in high school that ended up being a complete and utter like D-bag. And he was so into Diablo 2. Oh, yeah. No, let's rename it now. Here and now. But he would play it all the time. He's like, I'm sorry, I can't chat with you right now unless you're playing Diablo 2. So I have like an immense hatred for this game.
That's fair.
So back it up real quick. Not to like play into Joe's earlier comment, but is this a list of things that you should play that are like foundationally important or things you can revisit now? Or is it like, oh, you should really watch that black and white silent movie of the guy sneezing because it's super important, that sucks.
I don't think we can set parameters on this core. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, the two games that we have, both of them you can definitely go back to.
Exactly, but I just don't know if we want to like veer off into that.
No, it's a good point. I guess to me it does seem like it should make sense that you would have some fun playing it, right?
Because you could say adventure, but I wouldn't want to play adventure today.
Yeah, and I'm not even saying that Diablo 2 wouldn't be fun to play today, but like if you want a good action RPG to play today, that is not what I would that's not the first thing I'd recommend. I think it would feel too much like a history lesson when you could instead jump into, I mean, even Diablo 3 or Path of Exile or all of these other things that
because Diablo 2 is super important. Like it's a great game in its own right, but I revisited it last year and it was not as great as I remembered it being, but like your mileage may vary.
Yeah, it is tough because like definitely recognize the history, but if you're going to go back and experience like the original raw stuff, wouldn't you go back to the first Diablo even? Like what's the
there's such a leap between Diablo.
There's a huge leap between 1 and 2. I agree with you there.
Yeah.
So I think you can have fun with Diablo 2 now. I'm not sure you can with the first one at this point.
Diablo 2 is also one of those games that has like such amazing mechanics. Like they really just
Mm-hmm.
took the Diablo essence and just expanded it. But so much so that I think enough other games in history have taken those and built on them. So if we're saying from the perspective of taking Diablo 2 and putting it on a required reading list, I guarantee you that when you revisit this list in a year, there will be something else on it that Diablo 2 could have given you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe you're right. So the one that I always like think of in my head as my stupid benchmark would be like the original Super Mario Brothers. Like you can't argue with the history that game put out there. And also I still think it'd be fun to go back to now, even though there's so many other games that do side-scrolling platforming. Probably you could argue better at this point and at least look better. But in my mind, that game is still fun. And I don't know if that's just my nostalgia playing into that, but Diablo 2 is a little bit fuzzier for me.
I mean, I feel like if we want to put something on a required reading list, it should almost be more of a slam dunk than the sort of hemming and hawing we're doing, right? I'm not saying that I'm not saying it's a definite no or that it doesn't deserve the spot, but it's almost like I feel like if it deserved the spot for sure, we would have known right away.
Yeah.
I think you're right. It's a good game to talk about though, and
yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, I definitely had fun playing it back in the day. All right, let's do another one real quick. So Mark from Wayzata, Minnesota writes in. It says, "Hey guys, love the show. I have an obvious suggestion for required reading. We'll see how obvious it is." He says, Civilization, the original 4X strategy game. I've been playing since Civ 2 back in the 90s, and I've loved every sequel since. It's cool how you start out with a single settler and then watch it grow into a civilization, complete with cities, technology, military, and science development. The different types of government with various policies and laws are great, and if you're into strategy, the Civilization series tops them all.
They say they started with Civilization 2.
2, yeah.
And they're saying Civilization, though. So, like, just the franchise? Or are they saying a particular
that's what I was... Yeah, that's a good point. They did not specify which game you would start with.
Yeah,
and if somebody was like, hey, I want to get into the Civ games, I don't even think I'd point them back that far. I'd say, like, start with 5
Civ
or
4.
6. Yeah, or even 4 still good, yeah. So I don't know. That is curious. Is Civilization required reading, like of any type, of any of those entries? Do you think that's required reading for somebody who really loves games? Even as somebody who really loves Civilization, I guess I would hesitate to suggest it to somebody just because it's such a specific kind of game. You have to really like strategy and you have to really love digging in deep and looking at maps and looking at skill trees and all that stuff and planning out your turns. And it's kind of like chess, whereas I recognize chess is really good and it's a fun game, but some people hate thinking, you know?
So you're almost saying that even the best game in a particular genre isn't necessarily a must play if that genre has sort of a niche appeal.
I played Civ 6 for the first time this year, and I have a pretty limited history with that series. But I got really into it for whatever reason. I don't know why, but it clicked. So it's like I almost want to put it on the strategy, sim, 4X, whatever genre. And it's it's like putting books in the library. It's like you don't have to check these out, but we're putting these in here because they deserve to be here. And maybe you might find an interest. I think it's more of a slam dunk than Diablo 2 personally. But
yes,
I actually agree with what Ben was saying. I think even if it is the best of a particular, even if it flawlessly accomplishes the goals it's supposed to do, that doesn't necessarily mean that that those goals equal a required reading game.
Yeah, this is tricky because we don't know what specific entry we're talking about.
Yeah,
this would be
also tricky because we already know that Last of Us is on this list, and I'm thinking boy, it's funny that we're kind of hemming and hawing over Civilization, but then The Last of Us, which I like, it's I don't know that I would recommend that to everybody either.
Yeah, and actually,
I wasn't there for that, so
exactly. I wasn't there.
As we're talking about it, I'm thinking I feel like I'm going to regret not advocating for Diablo and Civilization if I think about this next week, right? So
yeah, Civilization is definitely, as I think more about it, even though I was kind of arguing against it, as I think more about it, I'm like, well, if you're really into games, because that is the qualifier. You are a person who's really into video games. Is Civilization a game you should check out? I would say yes to that answer. Is it a game you must play? I guess that's is it a game you should check out versus a game you must play? Is where I get kind of caught up. Like
You
you
know
should definitely check out Civilization if you've
If
not
it's-
played it before.
If it's like the modern ones, then it's like, yeah, you should play it. But if it's like 1 and 2 or whatever, and it's like you should maybe take a look if you're curious about how it got started. But I mean, maybe you're one of the people that can play old stuff and get into it, especially if you didn't grow up in the era and you don't have that appreciation.
I think we should put Ben. I think you should pick. You should, as the bigger fan of Civilization here. I think you should pick which one we do. Put it on there. I think we put Diablo 2 on there, and then in some show, in some episode next year, because this is the last episode of the year.
Is this the last episode
Of the year?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think it is.
So I think on some future show we can worry about cutting the list down. Like maybe we would put a number limit on it, and then we have to start making some hard choices.
Hmm.
But
I like
for
the way you think.
now, I think I would feel better about including games like Diablo and Civ rather than excluding them in the vague promise of something better.
Let's
Yeah,
punt.
I like that idea. Let's try to compile a good short list, and then we'll eventually cut it down to, I don't know, 20 or something.
Yeah.
The definitive games. But right now we're building the list and weeding out the easy weeds, right?
Yeah. So we can say so we don't have to say necessarily that the games on the list are slam dunks, but we should say that they're at least contenders for it. So we don't just throw every game on there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Aubrey, you seem like a Civ fan. Do you have one that you were like, you said Civ 4, it sounded like earlier.
Yeah, back in college, I lived in a house with a bunch of fellow classmates and whatnot. We had a computer in our kitchen that was dedicated to Civilization, and you just wrote on the whiteboard above you whose turn was next, and you'd come by and play whenever you had a moment. So we'd have games that would last like the entire semester. I think it was Civ 4. I don't know. I had a really fun experience playing it, but I think part of it too is that like I played it very passively.
Sure. Yeah. I have a fondness for Civ 5, I think is maybe the one I lean towards. Civ 4 is also really good. It's hard too, because like with those games, they get better as they continue to add stuff, which obviously makes sense. But like the best version of those games is always the one that they have right before they release the new numbered entry. I think I kind of want to lean towards 5. So I'm sure there's a bunch of Civ fans out there who will roast me for that, but that's the one I want to put on the list. One more. I think this can be a quick discussion, but I like that people are writing in with games. Jim from Philadelphia writes in. He says, I'd like to nominate Bastion from Supergiant Games for required reading. I really loved that game. I would especially recommend it for anyone who's been enjoying Hades lately if they did not play Bastion before. Bastion is a great game with fun combat, with a variety of weapons, a great narrative, excellent art, and music. I think I agree with all his points. Is Bastion required reading, though? Would you guys go that far?
I would say in the last like decade, absolutely. But
Games of all time, like that's hard.
It's like a definitive indie game of the decade, hands down.
If we had like genres within the definitive games of like the definitive games of this time or generation.
Like if we're talking, are we talking about the last decade or?
I think we're talking like all time. Yeah,
all time. I would include Braid before I'd include Bastion.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah, I don't even think Bastion is my favorite Supergiant game, honestly.
It used to be until Hades came out. I do love Bastion.
But like what he says here is like if you're loving Hades and you haven't played Bastion, yeah, I would say definitely go check it out. But I don't think it belongs quite on our required reading list. Good choices. Thanks for writing in. Please send them in if you got other ideas for that or characters you want us to rank or just emails to read. Send it at podcast@gameinformer.com. That brings us to the last segment of the show, of the last show of the decade. It is Get Wrecked. So let's go around the horn, recommend some things that people want to check out. Jeff Cork, got anything to recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. Blake Hester has written up a really interesting piece kind of about Rockstar Games back when they were developing that game Agent, which kind of had a tumultuous development history before being canceled. He's got a story kind of behind the scenes when the art team was visiting Egypt for some research in Cairo, and then they kind of ran afoul of the government, and there was kind of a bit of an international incident. It's a super interesting read, and I think it's a story that really has not been told before. So you might want to like get a beverage and find a comfy chair because it's really long, but it's also a really engrossing read. So there you go.
Awesome.
I just
cool.
imagine you sitting back in a chair with some popcorn, just like,
Yep,
this is great.
absolutely. One of the legs breaks and I fall down. And classic.
Just don't care. You're so fascinated. It's like, I don't care if the chair's broken. I'm gonna lay on the ground after this.
Perfect. Joe, what about you?
Yeah. Well, I guess I can. We can recommend our own things, right? Is that bad?
Ooh, we better.
So gauche.
Okay. Well,
Go for it.
One thing that's up on the site that I did recently that I had a good time with is a sort of a post-mortem interview about Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which, as we talked about earlier, is something that is a game I really enjoyed, and I got to sit down with the producer and sort of do our what we call afterwards in the magazine, just sort of like, let's dig a little bit into the decision-making process. Why did you make that skill tree foggy? And why is how did you decide to use the settlement as this hub for your game and things like that? And when it's those interviews are always fun when it's a game that turned out well and that you enjoy personally. It's just a way to sort of get some of those burning questions answered. So yeah, that interview is up on the site right now.
Very nice. Yeah, I want to recommend something I wrote because that's cool. I wrote top 10 dorks of the year, which was a fun list to put together, and you should check it out. It's on the site now. You want to guess what was number one?
Your mom.
Do you want to spoil it? It was my
that's a good one.
yeah. So, but it's still a fun list. So go
Got
read it. Marcus, what do you want to recommend?
I guess I'll recommend my own stuff. Think I'm cool. I interviewed you, Aubrey.
Yay!
It's already up. If you enjoyed Aubrey on the site, sat down with you. We talked about your career in games. Kind of a deeper dive. So if you're itching for more of Aubrey after the show, you should go back to the site. Search Aubrey Edwards on the Game Informer. You'll find it. It's a really, really fun feature, and yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. It's pretty good.
Yeah, it was a really fun interview because like a lot of times in wrestling, it's like, oh, Aubrey made games, great, cool, and then they just move on to the next thing. So it was like the first time I've actually gotten to talk about my background since joining wrestling. It was like, oh, I have to like go to my own LinkedIn and figure out what the hell I did all this time. It was a nice exercise in history.
Exactly. So give that a read, please.
Great. Aubrey,
Awesome.
What about you? You have anything to recommend to people check out or just plug in general?
I mean, you should definitely check out Dynamite on TNT every Wednesday at 8 o'clock, 7 Central. Especially if you don't like watching wrestling. Wrestling has changed a lot in the last 20 years. And there's something for everybody. We have a guy named Orange Cassidy who literally just sticks his hands in his pocket and gives like really lazy kicks to people.
He's the best.
He's so good.
He's great.
So good. We have
I like
two
the
guys
sound of
called
this
best
guy.
friends that hug each other. We have Chris Jericho, who's pretty amazing. We have different referees. Like all of our referees have personalities. We've got Darby Allen, who's this like punk emo kid who skateboards on people, but the skateboards have tacks. And then people bleed and it's crazy. So there's a little bit for everyone.
Some stuff.
Much like video games.
Yeah.
That's how I'm bringing it back.
Well,
Nicely done.
thank you for being on the show, Aubrey. We really appreciate it. Come back anytime you want, and good luck.
Yeah, this was
with
super fun. Thanks for having me.
Your shows, obviously. Yeah. And thank you out there for watching or listening to this episode of the GI Show. Please like and subscribe. Subscribe to the magazine. We always appreciate it. Whatever you do, come back next year and we'll have another episode for you. Until then, game on, everybody.
Happy New Year.